Hello, everyone. This is Valentina Rada, and we continue our journey into applied ethnography, this time with in-depth interviewing case interviews. About the case interviews, Palto mentions that there has been a significant increase in studies in which the core data consists of a sample of cases or qualitative interviews. Many of these types of cases are found in ethnographic studies. As you can see, we don't only talk about informant interviews, but we talk about case interviews. And this part of saying those are mainly pertinent to applied ethnography. So really quick, the key topics for this week that I have chose from this chapter are case interview data, strategies for in-depth interviews, and research plan guidelines. As it relates to the case interview data, Kalka is trying to make a clear difference between this case interviews and key informant interviews. And there are a couple of highlights here of why they are different. First of all, there is a focus on information about the informant. Case interviews are intended to focus on this kind of information, such as studies about domestic violence generally pay attention to, let's say, husband alcohol use or husband occupation, or what triggers the violent behavior. And you can see a couple of other examples of case interviews on page 159 in Palto's book. Then the other significant difference is it represents a core of semi-structured topics, unlike key informant interviewing, in which ideally each interview is different. When we talk about case interviews, we have a core of semi-structured topics that are same for all cases. Okay, so informant interviews can be different, but when we talk about case interviews, there are semi-structured topics. They describe the sample of cases. The sample of cases should be described in terms of main background, or what is called socio-demographic variables. So we have a clear understanding about the sample cases in terms of, I don't know, let's say gender, age, or income, or what is important to know for that in that particular research topic. Again, we talk about use of the local language. Case interviews often involve the use of words from the local language. And very important here, we talk about representative sampling. So whereas key informant interviews are generally not sources of quantitative data, and key informant interviews are not generally compare and contrast, the sets of case interviews, regardless of the sample size, are always, in some sense, representative of the variation in the study population. So the case interviews, they are a group of people, they are representative for the entire population you're looking to study. So let's move next to strategies for in-depth interviews. Whenever possible, you should have more than one interview session with each case in your sample. That will allow greater in-depth exploration of the main research topics. At the start of the interview, try to develop an informal, relaxed relationship with the informant. We talked about that before, through friendly discussions about the recent events or explaining the intent of the interview. So build that kind of relationship. So you can allow the informants to be open to give you the enough information that you're looking for. For many types of case interviews, it is possible to get extremely good information. If you ask informants, for instance, please tell me everything you did yesterday so I can understand your regular daily routine. And this kind of approach is mainly used when research is mainly concerned with regular or daily behaviors. If you want to understand a certain behavior that happens on a daily basis with the informants. The other area of the good interview focus, Palto at page 164 brings in some advices from James Spradley, and who says that a good interview focuses on having an explicit focus and strategy, explanations of the purposes, so the informant understands what the interviewer is trying to learn, as well as the ethnographic questions. So you not only have to be transparent with the purpose of the research, but have a strategy on how you're going to be that transparent with the informants. The other item is the probing with follow-ups. Probing is a strategy in interviewing. It looks like heavily used in ethnography. Probing refers to the wide range of ways to get further information within the framework of what the informant has told you up to that point. And there are a couple of great strategies, probing strategies at page 165. A couple of them, very simple, common sense, are something like, oh, this is interesting what you're saying, tell me more. Or I understand there was a conflict in the meeting. Could you please tell me what sort of conflict, what actually happened? Please provide me more details. Okay, so probing, I think it's a great strategy of, as I say, to try to gather more information. And keep in mind that if you are not yet at this point of interviews creating that solid relationship with the informants might be very general. So probing can be a great technique. Useful probe could be, can you please give me an example of that? This question demonstrates one of the most useful types of probing, particularly when informants give answers in generalization. So either ask them to elaborate or to give example of what they mean to say. Next, a research plan guidelines. And here, I found useful Palto's perspective of having at least 2 weeks explanatory phase. Before your case sample is selected, you should ideally have a period of social mapping. We talked about that. Participant observation and key informant interviewing. Hopefully, at least 2 weeks exploratory phase to get clear ideas of the local population and some of the locally relevant issues that you will incorporate into interviewing. So you don't right away jump into interviews. You have a preparation exploratory phase. The selection of the sample should be carefully planned. An option would be random sampling. Or if that's not feasible, another option would be carefully designed purposeful sampling. So remember we talked previous video about sampling. In ethnography, random or purposeful sampling are the most appropriate. In the most study interviews should deal mainly with actual behaviors, unless the research topic is intentionally narrowed down to a focus on cultural beliefs. So we look at the actual behavior. We want them to act like they're in their real kind of environment. Interviews should always include key background variables. The term is very unusual for me, especially background variables actually refers to sociodemographics. So you should have an understanding where each informant comes from, what age group, what gender and things like that. So parts of the interviews should be structured in the standardized manner for all the informants in order to allow quantifiable variables and some statistical analysis. So in other words, decide what socio-demographics or background variables you would like to know about the informants and keep that structure to each one of them in the case interviews. That way you would be able to generate like profiles for certain kind of informants. I don't know, you want to see females age 30 or younger, what is their background, what is their behavior. So be mindful of that, of capturing this demographic or background variables soon enough. Okay, so let's see what we talked about. We talked about case interview data and how that is different than key informant interviews. We also talk about the strategies for in-depth interviews, one of them being probing strategies. We want to know as much information possible. And the other thing, we talk about the research plan guidelines. We talk about what type of sampling strategies are recommended for an ethnographic research, in how important it is to capture the background demographic variables soon enough. Okay, so here we are. Questions for this chapter would be, other than age or marital status, what are background or demographic variables would you consider in your ethnographic inquiry and why? And the other question is, what probing techniques would you engage in the case of intentional misinformation from the informants? How would you handle such a situation? So let's say you feel like something is not matching with what other informants say, and that's more of misinformation, either is intentional or not. But the question is, what do you do in case there is intentional misinformation? And these are the references for this video. Thank you so much for continuing engaging in this journey and learning more about applied ethnography, and we will talk again soon. Thank you. Have a great day.